Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 true scary stories from deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Encounters from ridges, cabins, and forgotten backroads that look peaceful at first, but hold something far darker beneath the quiet. But before we continue, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and don't forget to like and share. Thank you for being here. Now then, let's begin. It was the second morning, the kind where the light feels thin and too dry, and the sound of the wind comes in from the trees with that faint scratching underneath it, like something's tagging along. I was out back hauling feed to the cows. The sun, not even all the way over the ridge yet. Emily was sitting on the porch in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, peeling husks off corn like she had nowhere better to be. She called out from the steps, not even looking up. "You remember what Dad said?" "Right. 3, don't go past the trail behind the barn." I tightened my grip on the sack and didn't turn around. "That's the 13th time you've said that." "Well, maybe it needs 14. I dropped the sack with a thud. "I'm 21, not 11. We were alone for 4 days. Mom and Dad had driven to Georgia to help care for Grandma, and I swore I could handle things here. Just us. The barn. The hills. The trail behind it had been overgrown for years anyway. A thin line through the grass that barely looked like a path anymore. Like the land had decided to take it back. Somebody went missing out here once. A hay delivery guy. Back in 2003. Drove up the long road and never made it back down. They found his truck 2 weeks later. Still loaded. Tires flat. No one ever found him. I wasn't scared. Not then. Just tired, and a little sick of being reminded to follow rules like I hadn't grown up on this land. That night, Emily was already asleep when I turned off the last light. I was heading to bed when I heard it. A short, low whistle. The kind our dad always used to call the dogs in. 1 note. Then a quick rise. Then silence. It came from out past the barn. I stood there in the dark a full minute, waiting to hear it again. Waiting to hear the dogs bark. But there was nothing. And Dad was in Georgia. The next morning, I didn't mention it. No point. Maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe a neighbor was messing around. But the way the sound cut through the dark like it belonged here, it stayed with me. By the second night, I was waiting for it. Not because I wanted to hear it again, but because some part of me already knew I would. And when it came, it wasn't just once. It started out near the tree line, moved closer, paused, then came again right behind the barn. Then again, right against the back wall of the house. I sat up in bed, heart kicking. The same whistle, same tune, same length, but wetter, like it was being forced through a dry throat. I crept downstairs and found Emily already standing at the kitchen sink, staring out the window. "You hear that?" I asked. She turned to me slowly. "I thought it was you." The next morning I checked the ground, damp with last night's rain, but there were smudges under the window by the kitchen, shaped like a boot print, but wrong in the middle, like someone had shifted their weight side to side. I didn't tell Emily. That night I set an alarm for 3. Sat up with a flashlight and a knife from the drawer. The house creaked like it always had. Wind tapping the eaves, but nothing out of place until 3:42. Then it came again. The whistle. Just one at first. Then a second, raspy and slow. Same melody. Right behind the wall. I threw on my boots, grabbed the light, and ran out the back door. The beam swung wild across the barn, into the tree line, then along the back of the house. Nothing. No movement. But I felt it then. This strange stillness, like something had stopped breathing just as I stepped outside. When I got back inside, the door was still locked. But Emily was sitting at the bottom of the stairs, hugging her knees, crying silently. Emily would not look at me at first. Her hair fell across her face as she kept her eyes on her knees, shoulders shaking a little. When she finally lifted her head, her voice came out thin. "I heard you calling me. From behind the barn. 2 times. But you were upstairs." Right. 3. My fingers tightened around the flashlight until they ached. I felt the whole house breathing around us. Slow and shallow, Emily wiped her face with her sleeve, and for a moment she looked younger than 17. I turned off every light and dragged her toward the living room. We sat by the cold fireplace with kitchen knives in hand. The house felt too open, too bright, even in the dark. Our ears strained for any sound outside. Each crack of the settling wood made my skin crawl. At 4:17 it came again, a soft whistle, then another, then a long pause. Same tune Dad used, but the second note dragged like someone pulling a voice from the bottom of their throat. I held my breath. I felt the hair on my arms lift. Then came the sound of footsteps. Slow, measured, brushing across the boards of the back porch. One step, then another. I stood carefully, moved to the small side window, and cracked it open with 2 fingers. There was no one there. But on the ground, stretched across the dirt under the big oak, was my shadow. Except it was not where it should have been. It was standing at an angle that did not match the light, like it came from a source behind me that was not really there. And the shadow's head was tilted up toward my window. I grabbed Emily and pulled her upstairs, locked the bedroom door, shoved a dresser against it, and forced the window open to the porch roof outside. The air was cold on my face as we climbed out. We dropped to the front steps and ran, not bothering with shoes or coats, just moving as far from the house as my legs could push. The path to Robert's place cut through the tree line. Most nights it felt peaceful, but now every branch seemed to pull at us. Emily held my arm and stumbled twice. When we hit the halfway point, I heard her voice behind us. Lena. It wasn't her. I knew it instantly. The tone was wrong. The echo behind it was too empty. I turned and swept the flashlight across the trees, but there was nothing there. We kept running. The next sound came closer. A short, familiar whistle, drifting through the dark like someone leaning right beside my ear. I swung the light so fast my wrist cracked, but the beam caught only fog and branches and empty air. My foot snagged a root and I hit the ground hard. Pain shot up my leg and my knee scraped raw. Emily reached down, but I pushed her back and stood up again. That was when another light flickered in the distance. A steady lantern glow, moving toward us. It was Robert. He approached with a hunting rifle under his arm and a tired look on his face. I told him everything at once, stumbling through the words, and he listened without blinking. He did not ask questions. He did not look surprised. He simply told us to follow and turn back toward our property. We went the long way, keeping to the deeper woods so nothing near the barn could track us. The walk felt endless. Every sound made Emily grip my sleeve. When the house finally came into view, I wished it had not. Every window was lit. Upstairs, in the bedroom we had locked from the inside, a silhouette stood behind the glass. It was Emily. Same height, same hair, same posture. Her face was turned toward us, as if waiting for us to step closer. Robert didn't say a word when we reached the edge of the clearing. He just stopped, looked up at the house, and then ran. Full sprint, toward the porch, up the steps, and through the front door without a single glance back. "Wait, Robert," I shouted, but he was already inside. I grabbed Emily's arm and we followed. The house lights were still blazing. Every window on the second floor was glowing like it was noon. When I hit the doorway, I heard it, a gunshot. From upstairs, I shoved Emily behind me and ran. My boots hit the stairs hard enough to rattle the frame. When I reached the landing, Robert was standing just outside the guest room, shoulders hunched, gun lowered. The barrel still smoked faintly. There was no one else there. He didn't move, didn't look at me, just stared at the empty hallway like he wasn't sure what he'd seen. I stepped forward. "What happened?" "3." He didn't answer, just murmured something under his breath. I caught only one word. "Wrong." Then I heard it. A scream from downstairs. "Emily." I turned and bolted. Robert was right behind me. We hit the bottom floor in seconds, but there was nothing. The front door still hung open. The porch light buzzed, but the space where Emily had been was empty. Her knife lay on the carpet just inside the threshold, and near the back of the hallway, smeared across the floorboards, were muddy footprints leading toward the attic stairs. The police came in the morning. Dogs, flashlights, tape, no footprints outside, no sign of forced entry. They asked me if Emily had run away, if Robert had fired in panic, if we had all imagined the same thing. No one asked about the whistle. Robert refused to speak about it. I saw him once more before I left. I asked him if he thought she was still out there. He just shook his head and said, if it knows how to be her, then it knows how to wait. That's what Robert said before turning away. And I just stood there, not ready to move, not ready to believe. I called my parents that same morning, told them everything. My voice cracked halfway through. I didn't know what to say except, Emily's gone. They drove through the night from Georgia, arrived before sunrise. Mom barely spoke. Dad walked straight past me and into the woods. We searched for 3 days. The barn, the creek, the ridge, even down near the old quarry. My father yelled until his voice broke. My mother sat on the porch steps with Emily's coat in her hands and wouldn't let it go. The police called it a missing persons case, said she might have run off, said there were no signs of a struggle. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And I know I let her out of my sight. I should have never taken her back to that house. I should have stopped Robert from going in first. I should have held her hand the whole way down the stairs. Now every time I close my eyes, I see the doorway lit from inside. I see her face, blank, unsure if it's hers. And then comes the whistle, 2, 5, same notes, same breath, over and over until I jerk awake, sweating, heart hammering in my throat. And each time, the same thought comes crawling back. She was calling for me, and I didn't answer. I still don't understand why I came back to this house when I did. Maybe it was because I owed my mother one last promise, or because I was more afraid of what she left behind than I ever wanted to admit. Every time someone mentioned the old home up in the Appalachian hills, something inside me would sink a little, like a part of me knew something had been left there, waiting. My name's Mark Taylor. I'm 33, a repair tech for electronics in Knoxville, living a quiet life most folks wouldn't remember unless their microwave broke twice. After my mother passed earlier this month, I took a couple weeks off work and drove up here alone. Originally, I just meant to clean up the house, lock it up, and leave. But, if I'm honest, I came to run away. She died suddenly. No warning. No goodbye. After the funeral, I couldn't breathe in the city anymore. Couldn't handle people laughing like nothing had changed. I figured this place would be quieter. The first day back, I stayed in my old room. Morning light cut through the maple outside the window, and the valley below was still soft with fog. I brewed coffee, listened to the creek behind the house like I used to, then sat on the porch with it, watching the knee-high grass sway in the breeze. Spent the afternoon clearing brush, sweeping the path, wiping down the kitchen. At night, I cracked open a cheap beer and let the quiet settle around me like a blanket. On the third day, I went up to the attic. The ceiling was just as low and dusty as I remembered. But something felt off. In the far corner, half covered in shadow, sat a large wooden trunk with rusted iron clasps. I swear I'd never seen it before. When I was a kid, I used to come up here all the time, chasing flies, poking around for comic books my cousins left behind. But that trunk, never. I would have remembered something that big, something that strange. And yet, it was there, like it had always been. What really unsettled me wasn't just the trunk itself. It was what my mother had said once, years ago. When I asked about a thud I heard overhead at night. "Don't touch the trunk in the attic," she said without even turning. "It doesn't belong to this house." That memory hit me like cold water. I stood there a long minute, staring at it. The dust around it looked undisturbed, except for one thing, a faint trail, like it had shifted slightly. maybe a few inches toward the attic window. I felt a chill crawl up my arms, but I told myself it was just my nerves. Old houses creak, trunks slide, floors tilt. That night, after brushing my teeth, I realized I'd left the attic light on. I climbed back up to turn it off. As soon as I reached the top step, I stopped cold. The trunk had moved again, just a bit, but enough that its front edge was clearly closer to the stairs than it had been. I stood there, staring at it for what felt like 5 minutes, waiting for some sound. Mouse, wind, anything. But the attic was dead still. I flicked off the light and came down, trying not to imagine it inching forward behind me in the dark. I froze at the top of the stairs. I didn't want to turn around. Something about the way the floor creaked behind me wasn't right. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, like someone shifting their weight gently back and forth, just enough to make sure I heard them. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was thick, too thick for an empty attic. I stared at the open trunk, expecting something to move inside, but it didn't. Just the lid yawning upward. Shadows pooled so deep I couldn't see the bottom. I dropped into a crouch and backed away, one hand fumbling for the flashlight app on my phone. When the beam flicked on, I swept the room fast, half hoping, half dreading what it might catch. Nothing. No one. Just that smell again, heavier than before. Damp and somehow sweet, like rotting wood and perfume left in a drawer too long. I bolted, slammed the attic door, and dragged a chair across the hallway to block it. Then I sat on the kitchen floor with a knife in my lap, listening. There was no more creaking, but something whispered faintly through the ceiling, like wind slipping through a crack that hadn't been there yesterday. When daylight finally came, everything felt different. Smaller, armless. I checked the locks, the windows, the stairs. Nothing out of place. I told myself I'd imagined it all. Stress and sleeplessness. Maybe a weird dream I'd half walked through. Still, I called a locksmith that afternoon, asked him to remove the old trunk latch entirely. He came up, sniffed once, then ran his hand over the wood and said, almost like talking to himself, "This kind of wood holds on to things. Moisture, smell, memory." I didn't like the way he looked at it, or at me. Once he was gone, I wrapped the trunk in a blanket, ran a chain through the handles, taped it shut, and pushed it into the furthest corner of the attic. I didn't care what was inside. It wasn't mine. It never had been. That night, for the first time in days, I fell asleep before midnight. No noises, no dreams. The kind of rest you only get when your body finally stops fighting, until just after 3. I woke to a sharp, grating sound. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but it didn't stop. A scraping noise, slow and deliberate, like fingernails against wood. Then a pause. Then again, and again. Not random. It had a rhythm. 3 short strokes, then silence. 3 more. It sounded like letters. Someone was trying to write something. Right above me. I got up, grabbed my phone, and walked to the attic stairs. Each step groaned like it was warning me. The light from the screen shook in my hand, casting jumpy shadows along the walls. At the top, I lifted the phone and aimed toward the far corner. The trunk was gone. In its place was a neat line of objects laid out side by side. A child's dress, faded pink with torn lace. A long ribbon, the same color as the one that had dropped near my foot that first night. A rusty kitchen knife, and a photograph I'd never seen before. But I knew it instantly. It was me. Not how I looked now, but younger. Maybe 5, maybe 6. Hair a little longer, cheeks round. But it wasn't a photo my mom ever took. I knew that for sure. I had never worn those clothes. I stepped forward slowly, then stopped. Just below the objects, carved into the wood, were words. The letters were still fresh, the cuts pale and raw on the attic floor. Mark Taylor, age 34. I stagger back, and the breath catches in my throat. I bump into something solid behind me. The trunk is there, right against my spine. No footsteps, no dragging sounds, but it is there, as if it had always been there, pressed against me, like it's waiting. I don't remember how I got downstairs. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I was outside, barefoot, breath sharp and cold in my chest, before I realized I'd left the attic door wide open behind me. Somewhere up there, something shifted. Not loud, just enough to let me know it was settling in, or settling down. I never went back, not even to pack. The house is still in my name, but I let the mailbox pile up and the yard go to seed. I don't want to know what's growing in there now. Most nights, I sleep fine. But every few weeks, I dream of the trunk, not open, not shut, just sitting there in the middle of a room I don't recognize. A few months later, I got an email from the law office handling Mom's estate. Said there was still an item marked for delivery under her name, and asked if I wanted it forwarded. Attached was a photo. It was the trunk, sitting in a shipping room, half in shadow. Stamped in red across the side, property of Mark Taylor. I never replied. But that night, just before dawn, I heard it again. The gentle creak of wood, just outside my apartment door. Before we step into the next story, if you're still here, still listening, with the lights low, maybe drop a comment. Just tell me where you're listening from. It helps more than you know. All right, let's keep going. Name's James Collier. I was 34 then, 6 years into the job with the Forestry Division, working out of the south end of Boone County. Most of the time, that meant paperwork, fire risk reports, and the occasional drunk hiker. But after the storm hit last week, we were sent up into the ridge trails to check for damage. That morning, I was out with two others. Todd Ramsey, 25, just a few months into the job and still too eager, and Rick Dawson, who had been doing this longer than I'd been shaving. The kind of man who didn't talk much, but when he did, as you listened, we parked off the fire road and hiked in from the east side. The ground was a mess. Branches snapped across the path, mud sucked at our boots, and half the lower switchbacks had collapsed into a wide slick of clay. We moved single file, heads down, checking for trail obstructions and flagged hazards. Who brought the shovel? Todd asked behind me. No one, I said without turning. We're marking, not digging. You sure? I thought I saw one in the truck bed. If it's there, it's still there. Rick didn't say a word, just kept walking. We reached the ridgeline around midday. The trees thinned out, and for a while, the sun made it easier to breathe. But just before the next bend, Todd stopped short. He said, should we be seeing this? I stepped up beside him and looked down. The soil had been disturbed, about 3 feet long, too wide, fresh, dark, packed low and tight with a mound of loose dirt beside it. No plants, no tools, no drag marks. That's not runoff. I said, somebody dug this. Rick stood over it, arms crossed. Not wildlife. Too clean. No one's cleared to dig in this zone. I added, especially not without logging a permit. Todd looked around. Could have been a hunter. Burying waste, maybe. A carcass. With what? I asked. None of us brought a shovel. No answer. Just wind pushing through the trees. I flagged the location in my field notes. Rick planted a survey marker. We'd report it when we got back. Part of me already didn't want to. We hiked another mile before the slope got too slick to keep moving. There was an old lean-to off Trail 9B that we'd used before. Half collapsed but dry. We made camp there. Ran a radio check. Heated canned beans over a fold-up stove. Rick wandered off after dark. Said he needed air. I woke around 3 to take a piss and found the trees heavy with fog. Just past the clearing, 20 yards out, I saw movement. Rick, He was crouched low, using something in his hands. Not a shovel. Looked like a sharpened branch. He was digging. The rhythm was slow, intentional, like he'd done it before. I didn't call out. I just watched until he stood, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked back toward camp. When the sun came up, Rick was sitting by the fire, sipping coffee like nothing happened. Todd blinked at the clearing. "Where's the marker?" I followed his line of sight. The spot we'd flagged yesterday was flat, clean, untouched. No stake, no mound, no hole. I walked to the spot myself. The ground was damp, but not disturbed. No trace of the hole we saw. No boot prints. No sign of the orange stake Rick had driven in. It was like the ridge had swallowed it whole. Todd followed me out, rubbing the back of his neck. "You saw it too, right? That wasn't just me yesterday." "No," I said. It was real. I pulled out the GPS to double-check our route. The screen blinked. Our location showed fine. But yesterday's marker was gone. No data. Like we had never stopped there at all. The breadcrumb trail cut off 2 points early. We circled back toward the slope, hoping to spot anything else out of place. That was when I found the second hole. Smaller, maybe 2 feet across, half covered with a scattering of leaves. I stepped closer, careful not to slip. Something pale peeked out from under the dirt. A scrap of fabric. Worn. Mud-stained. Looked like it used to be part of a work shirt. The collar was still intact. I didn't touch it. Todd stood behind me, voice low. "That looks like blood." I didn't answer, just stared at the edge of the fabric and the loose earth around it. Something was wrong out here. More than just the digging. "We call it in," I said. Now, we turned back toward the lean-to. Rick was gone. His bedroll was untouched. Thermos still by the fire. But his boots were missing. So was his pack. No note. No noise. Just silence, stretching out wide around the trees. Todd started pacing in small, tight circles. "He left us." What the hell does that mean? I didn't know, but my stomach turned when I spotted the thing Rick had left behind, leaning against the wall of the lean-to like he had placed it there on purpose. A shovel, not the metal kind from Supply. This one was rough, carved from a thick branch, shaped into a blade, worn smooth at the handle. On the flat of it, scratched deep and raw, were the words, "We have to bury it." Todd read it out loud, then looked at me like I had answers. "We move." I said, "We don't wait." We grabbed our bags and headed northeast, not toward the trucks. We didn't trust the trail anymore. The woods felt shifted, paths narrowing, brush thicker, like the forest didn't want us to leave. We hiked in silence, boots sinking into soft earth. Halfway through a clearing, I heard it, the sound of digging, close, rhythmic, wet, just behind the tree line. I raised a hand to stop Todd. The sound paused, then started again, closer this time. We ran. Brush tore at our clothes. Branches whipped past our faces. Something crashed through the trees behind us too, maybe 3 steps behind. When we finally stopped, chest burning, I turned and listened. Nothing. Just wind, and a distant creak of wood bending. We caught our breath near the edge of a gully. That was when we found Rick. He was kneeling, quiet, digging again with that same wooden shovel. Beside him, half buried in mud, was a torn backpack soaked in something dark. He didn't look up, just muttered, "We have to bury it. It's still breathing." Todd lunged before I could stop him. "Rick, drop it," he yelled. Rick turned, eyes flat. A blade flashed in his hand. The next second blurs. Todd grabbed Rick's arm. I stepped in to pull them apart. Pain exploded through my shoulder. He had cut me. I swung with my elbow and knocked him off balance. Rick hit the dirt, still clinging to the shovel. I kicked it out of reach, then brought my hiking stick down across his back until he stopped moving. Todd was gasping. My arm bled freely. But we didn't wait. We left the pack, left the hole, left Rick face down in the mud. On the way out, we passed at least 3 more spots where the earth had been disturbed. No stakes, no tape, just dirt, smoothed over, like someone had tried to cover something in a hurry. Rick was taken in that evening. He didn't resist, just kept mumbling the same phrase over and over. We have to bury it. We have to bury it. The police dug up the sites. Most were empty. One held animal bones, but one hole near the southern ridge. They never finished excavating. A spring had burst underneath, flooded the site, collapsed the soil before the forensics team could finish. Todd transferred out 2 weeks later, took a desk post in Charleston, told me he was done with backwoods patrol for good. I stayed, but I don't walk the South Ridge anymore. And every time I see a shovel leaning in the corner of the supply shed, I check the blade first, just to be sure. Because when someone tells you they didn't bring one, you better damn well look twice. I hadn't seen Cora in over 5 years, but when we met again, it felt like we'd never stopped talking. We sat in her kitchen for hours, the kind of catch-up that stretches into shared silence. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "We should go out there again. Just one night. Clearback Ridge." The name caught in my throat. I nodded anyway. Back in college, we had camped there with a group of friends. Fall break, 2017. 5 of us, a cheap tent, and too much trust in the weather forecast. It rained hard that night. By morning, one of us was gone. His name was Tyler. They said he must have gotten lost in the dark, slipped on wet stone. The search lasted 3 days. His body was found near the bottom of a ravine. Shoes missing, one arm bent beneath him like he had been reaching back. We never talked about it. Not really. On the drive up, Cora hummed along with the radio like she hadn't replayed that weekend in her head 1,000 times. I stared out the window, counting turns. Clearback Ridge hadn't changed much. Still narrow, still quiet. The trailhead was barely marked. Cora threw her pack down and started assembling the tent. She said, "The fire that night. I remember it. We thought the wind killed it. But when we woke up, it was still glowing red." I looked away. If I had told the truth back then, that I was the last one to see Tyler leave the circle, that he had looked back like he wanted someone to stop him, maybe it wouldn't have ended the way it did. We pitched camp on the same clearing as before. Just a soft dip in the hillside ringed by trees, open enough to see the stars, but small enough to feel held in. Cora gathered firewood. I unpacked the food, avoiding the slope where Tyler had once said the view looked too perfect to trust. When the fire caught, it burned unevenly, flaring fast, then settling low. We didn't need to feed it much. Cora joked that maybe the trees remembered us and were offering dry wood out of pity. I forced a laugh and flicked on my phone. The battery was at 42%. I hadn't touched it all afternoon. I opened the camera and filmed the fire. Just a habit from documenting everything. By the time I stopped recording, the battery was down to 3%. I stared at the screen, confused. Cora leaned over and waved a hand. "Don't waste it," she said. "No signal up here anyway." Later, she fell asleep first, curled up in her sleeping bag, face turned away, breathing slow and steady. I stayed by the fire, knees pulled to my chest. The flames barely moved, but they didn't shrink either. I watched them hold their shape. Stubborn and patient, a breeze rolled in, just enough to rustle the tent walls and press cool air against my arms. I reached for the water bottle, stood up, and walked to the edge of the clearing. There, in the dirt, were shoe prints, old ones, faded, but there, circling the camp, like someone had walked around it slowly. Once, I turned back and looked at the fire. It was still burning, steady, bright, and I had never added more wood. Neither of us moved. The fire burned clean and tall, as if it had never gone out. The figure sitting beside it didn't shift or breathe, just sat there, knees drawn in, arms around legs, head tilted forward like they were listening to something in the coals. I grabbed Cora's wrist. "Don't," I whispered. She had already taken a step toward the fire. I was just going to... No. Look at their back. It was soaked. Not with sweat, but water. The way someone looks when they have walked too long through rain. The hair clung flat against the neck. Their shirt sagged with weight. But we hadn't had rain. Not yet. I fumbled for my phone. The screen flickered. 1%. I tapped the camera and lifted it. Through the lens, no one. The fire showed. The rocks. The clearing. But the figure wasn't there. I lowered the phone. The figure was still sitting. Just as still. Cora looked at me and nodded. We packed fast. Rolled the tent without speaking. Shoved gear into our bags. And left the fire burning behind us. I didn't look back. Not until we reached the edge of the trees. Rain started falling 5 minutes later. Light at first. Then harder. The kind that turns dirt to paste and finds every open seam in your jacket. We followed the slope. Boots sliding. Flashlights, dull under fog. It took us almost an hour to reach the trailhead. The car was still there. Unmoved. The clearing. No longer in sight. Inside. Cora slumped into the passenger seat. I sat behind the wheel and locked the doors. Neither of us spoke. Only the steady tapping of rain on the windshield filled the space. Out of habit, I opened my voice recorder. I had left it running earlier when I narrated the trail notes. I scrolled to the most recent entry. About 10 minutes long. I hit play. My voice came through clearly. Wind noise. My usual tone. Then silence. And then, at minute 9, another voice. Soft. A whisper. This time you stayed quiet. Next time. Who will? Cora looked at me. I didn't say that. I said, I know. I went to delete the file. The phone shut off before I could tap the screen. Battery dead. Cora leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. Her breath fogged the glass. I stayed still. Too wired to sleep. The rain had stopped. That was the part that scared me most. I opened the door and stepped outside. The forest was dark. Still. When I turned back toward the car, the inside lights had dimmed. The seat next to me was empty. Cora. No answer. I opened the door. Called out again. Nothing. On the driver's seat was a scrap of flannel. Blue and torn at the edges. Tyler's shirt. The one he had worn that night in 2017. I stumbled backward. Heart pounding. Looked toward the trees. 3 fires burned now. Not 1. 3. Each small. Each the same impossible glow as before. They sat in a loose triangle. Around our original campsite. I should have left. I know that. But I stood there. Rooted. The heat of it pressed against my face, though I wasn't near the flames. Then came footsteps. Shallow. Careful. Walking through wet grass. Behind me. I turned. She stood there. Myself. Drenched. Mud streaked across my boots and thighs. A notebook in her hand. My old one. The field notes from that night in 2017. The one I had lost. She held it like something sacred. I couldn't move. She looked at me. Then past me. Toward the fires. I ran. I didn't stop until I hit the gravel shoulder halfway down the mountain. No one ever found Cora. I told them she got separated. That the storm disoriented us. I never mentioned the fires. Or Tyler. Or the voice on the recorder. I can't be near flame now. Not candles. Not camp stoves. I cross the street if someone lights a cigarette. The smell of smoke makes my lungs lock. I haven't gone back to Clearback. I won't. But every year on October 15th, sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning, my phone lights up on its own. The screen stays black. No app opens. No sound plays. Just light. Steady and pulsing. Like something still waiting to be seen. Name's Bill Harper. I was 41 that fall. Still living alone on the same patch of land my folks left me. Just me. 6 head of cattle, some chickens, and the kind of quiet most folks can't stand for more than a weekend. I liked it that way. The barn was old but solid. Hand-built by my father and his 2 brothers in the early 70s. Still held up better than most of the prefab junk they throw together now. Each morning, I got up at 5 sharp, fed the birds, checked the fence line, walked out back to unlatch the stall door and let the cows out. Except, for about a week straight, I hadn't needed to. Every morning, the door was already open. First couple times, I figured I must have forgotten to latch it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it didn't catch. But by the 4th time, I was sure. I had closed it, latched it proper. I even pulled on it to double-check. Still, every dawn, it hung wide like I'd never touched it. There were no prints, no broken locks, no animals missing. Just an open stall and that quiet hum that comes with morning fog. I bought a new latch from town. Steel. Heavy. Installed it myself. Made damn sure it clicked. That night, I checked it twice. Next morning, the latch was lying in the dirt. Not snapped. Not bent. Just open. That was when I started getting suspicious. Not scared. Just irritated. Someone messing around on my land. Maybe kids from over the ridge thinking they were funny. But I didn't have neighbors within shouting distance. And even fewer who'd bother hiking in just to play a prank on an old man with cows and a shotgun. So I got a motion cam. One of those cheap things that links to your phone. I strapped it to the fence post facing the stall, angled just right to catch the door and the yard in front of it. Then I waited. 25. The first night, nothing. The app showed no motion alerts, no recordings, just silence. Second night, same. Third night, I stayed up, sat inside with the lights off, looking through the front window with a thermos of coffee and my flashlight ready. I kept glancing at the app, waiting for it to ping. At 3:12 inches the morning, I looked up from the screen and saw the stall door open. No sound, no breeze, just open. I ran out there barefoot, flashlight in one hand. The cows were still inside, calm, like nothing had moved. But the lock lay in the dirt again, clean and unbroken. This time, it was sitting in the exact center of the path, like someone had placed it there. Gently, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I checked the footage. Nothing from 2:30 to 4. The cam went dark. No motion. No sound. Just an empty black screen like it had never been on. Everything before and after worked fine. That was when something in me shifted. I stopped thinking someone else was doing this, and started wondering if it was me. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe I had bumped the camera. Maybe the software glitched. But the part I couldn't ignore was the lock. How it kept ending up in the same spot, every time. Always clean. Always open. I thought about calling someone. But who? I didn't have family left nearby. The few folks I knew from town would chalk it up to stress or age. And the last thing I needed was to end up on some watch list. Out here, once they think you're losing it, they start asking questions you can't unanswer. So, I did what any stubborn old man would do. I set up a second camera, one in the barn, one inside my house. I told myself it was just to be thorough. But the truth is, I needed to know. That night, I left the stall locked, same as always, hid the key under the porch, and placed a metal bucket in front of the door. If it moved, I'd hear it. I even took a sleeping pill, figuring it was time I got some rest. Just a few hours to clear my head. The next morning, I got up and went straight to the footage. The barn cam cut out around 3:06. Again, no sound, just black. But the camera in my bedroom kept rolling. At 3:05 exactly. I sat up in bed, eyes open, no blinking, no expression. I watched myself stand, walk to the coat rack, pull on my flannel and boots, pick up the flashlight, and leave the room. door swinging shut behind me. I have no memory of it. None. And the worst part, I looked calm, like I had done it before. I sat there a long time staring at myself on the screen. My face held nothing. No tiredness. No confusion. Just that blank, steady look. The kind people wear when they already know where they are going. I replayed it twice before forcing myself outside. The morning was colder than usual, and the fog hung low enough that I could not see the tree line. I checked the barn. The door was wide open again. The metal bucket had tipped over and rolled a few feet into the pasture as if kicked. I picked up the lock. It was warm. That detail gnawed at me. It should have been wet with dew, cold from the night air. Instead, it felt like it had just been handled. My hand shook a little as I clipped it back on the latch. I did not bother to close it tight. I needed to think. Maybe it was sleepwalking. I told myself that enough times to half believe it. I hid the key in the kitchen drawer and left the barn untouched until dusk. When the sun dipped, I set the cameras again, one facing the door, one facing my bed, one near the back window in case I had gotten creative in my wandering. I forced down a sleeping pill and lay still. The house creaked as it always did. The rooster clucked once in his sleep. Then everything settled. Somewhere past midnight, I slipped under. At 3:27, I woke to the sound of metal striking wood. A rough clang. Then another. I was on my feet before I realized what I was doing. This time there was no blank calm. No drifting haze. My body jolted. Tourette, heart punching hard against my ribs. I threw on my coat and ran to the back door. The yard was lit by my barn light. It should have been off. I never left it on. The stall door hung open, swaying gently. The mud around it was churned up as though something heavy had paced there for hours. My camera lay in the middle of the clearing, face down. I knelt and picked it up. The screen was cracked. The red light flickered. The footage was still rolling. My hands were shaking when I hit play. The camera had captured something before it fell. Snowy static at first. Then motion. The lens tilted upward, catching the barn door swinging. Then a shape stepped into view. Me. My face filled the frame. Close. Too close. I was holding the lock in one hand, turning it over like a puzzle piece. The flashlight beam glowed against my collar, but my eyes, something about them stopped me cold. In the reflection of my pupils was a faint, narrow glimmer of red. Not barn light, not the flashlight, something deeper, like a coal holding heat on its own. I snapped the camera shut and stood there, breathing hard. The air felt wrong. Heavy. My field boots sank deeper into the mud than they should have. I backed away slowly. Every instinct screamed to leave the barn behind me, to put distance between myself and whatever had worn my face on that recording. But as I turned to head for the house, the stall door creaked. Once, a long, slow sound, as if metal slid across the bolt from the inside. I did not look back. I ran. The next day, I called a buyer, sold all 6 cows, cleaned the barn out, hung a sheet of plywood across the stall door and nailed it down until the wood splintered. I left the lock on the ground. Could not bring myself to pick it up again. I stopped using keys altogether. The snap of a latch made my shoulders knot tight. Even the sound of a gate closing in town put a tremor through my hands. I never checked the cameras again. I shoved them into a drawer and covered them with rags. But I still walked the yard every morning. Old habits keeping me tethered. Nothing was inside the barn anymore. Yet some mornings, when the fog was thick and I was standing close enough, I would hear the latch shift. Not loud, not bright metal, just a soft slide, as if the bolt were nudged from the other side by someone who knew the motion well. Someone who moved the way I moved. Someone who had learned the routine better than I had. That's the problem with digging too deep, the old man said, his fingers hovering just above the stack of folders. Some things don't stay buried. The more you look, the more they remember you. I gave him a polite smile and didn't answer. He smelled faintly of toner and mildew, like paper that had been damp once and never truly dried. I was used to people warning me off. Small towns protect their own myths. Beckley was no different. I was 30, working freelance between Raleigh and Charleston, usually chasing low-budget scandals and interview reels for regional podcasts. But this was different. 4 people vanished from this town in 2004. No signs of struggle, no trace of where they went. I was 13 when it happened, and I remembered the flyer photos. Blurry. Rushed printouts taped to telephone poles. Now, 2 decades later, I was chasing their last known traces. Just voices in old interviews and clipped articles, until I found the photo. It was wedged between the final pages of a water-stained envelope marked MISC. June 04. The paper was heavier than most. Color print. Sun faded. 3 people standing by a rust-red sedan in front of a peeling clapboard house. 2 men. 1 woman. All smiling. Relaxed. But there was a 4th figure. The face was smeared. Not blurred, like a lens error, but smeared. Warped in just that spot. As if the image had refused to finish rendering. The back was labeled in pen, taken June 13, 2004. But the disappearance was recorded on the 12th. I snapped a photo with my phone, holding my breath like the act might disturb it. I didn't say anything to the archivist. Just slid the folder shut and thanked him. He watched me go with a look that said he'd seen this play out before. That night, I sent the image to Sarah, a friend who did forensic retouching for trial exhibits. She'd helped me before, usually on things like license plates or reflections in mirrors. I didn't say where the photo came from, only asked if the smear could be reversed. She replied the next morning. This wasn't done digitally, she said. There's no compression artifact, no overlay. It's not blurred. It was like that when it came out of the camera. I remember the cold of the motel AC as I read that message. It was summer, but my hands felt dry and wrong. The next day I drove out to the house from the photo. I had to find a side road off Route 3, barely wide enough for my car. Weeds licking the doors. The house had been empty for years. Boarded windows. Rotting porch. The kind of place even teenagers stopped daring each other to enter after a while. I broke in through the back. I didn't feel brave, just stubborn. The kitchen was gutted. Flies hummed under the sink. Upstairs, every floorboard whispered under my weight. But in the basement, I found it. Same rust-red walls. Same concrete stains. On a half-collapsed shelf, under a film of dust, was a folder with photos. My hands trembled opening it. Inside, the same picture, but not quite. This time, the 4th face wasn't blurred. It was fully visible. And it was mine. Me. Wearing the same denim jacket I had on that day. But the photo was aged. The ink had faded slightly. The edges curled inward like it had been sitting there since 2004. I backed out of that basement, heart hammering, and didn't stop until I was in my car, hands shaking as I tried to unlock the screen. But the photo I took at the archive, it was gone from my phone, vanished, as if I'd never pressed the shutter. Back at the motel, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I never actually saved it. Maybe my thumb slipped. I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder I'd used for case notes. Gone. The image file had vanished. Recycle bin, empty. I hadn't deleted anything. That was when I saw the email. No sender name. No subject line. Just a reply header. You were there. I should have stopped. I know that now. But I clicked. There was only one attachment. A single photo. No message. No context. Just the image. It showed the basement I'd just left. The same crumbling shelf. And me. Standing in the middle of the room. Staring directly at the camera. My face calm. My eyes fixed. But no one else had been there with me. I did not sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with every light on, trying to convince myself that the attachment was staged. Maybe someone at the archive had followed me. Maybe it was a prank. The mind reaches for anything that feels normal. At dawn, I called Mark back at the Raleigh office. he answered, groggy and confused, which somehow reassured me. I asked him to check the internal log for the missing persons file. The pause on the line stretched a little too long. "There is nothing here," he said. "No transfers from Beckley, no photos, no archive notes, and there is no record of a missing persons case in 2004 from that area." I almost told him he must be wrong, but his voice was steady. He read off the digital index twice just to show me he meant it. I drove to the Beckley police station next. The building looked sunken into the ground, like the years had pulled it down by the roof. Inside, the lights flickered gently, and the air carried a faint smell of metal and dust. The front clerk barely looked up when I asked about the old case. He checked the binder on the desk. Thin pages, names in long columns, dates in neat pen. For 2004, there were no entries related to disappearances. Not a single one. It was as though the story I had been researching for weeks had been plucked clean from the town records. I drifted down the hallway and found an old photograph framed on the wall. It showed the investigation team from that era. 12 people lined up in front of a patrol car. I scanned each face until I froze. Near the edge of the group stood a woman with her head turned, hair falling the same way mine did, the same height, the same posture. Her face was just out of the frame, as if she had shifted at the wrong moment. I stepped closer without thinking, my breath fogging the glass in a soft circle. Back at the motel, I sat on the bathroom counter and stared into the mirror, my hands pressed against the cool surface, trying to feel something steady. I whispered my name just to hear my own voice. "I am Rachel," I said, but something inside me pushed back. A soft echo, not out loud but close enough that I felt it brush the inside of my skull. "No, not anymore." I steadied myself with slow breathing. I told myself this was stress, exhaustion, the kind of spiral that happens when a story grows too large. For a few minutes it even worked. The room went quiet. The fear sat still. It was the closest thing to calm I had felt since arriving. That night, I left my phone recording on the nightstand. I told myself it was for proof. I told myself it was a journalist thing. But in truth, I needed to know if something was happening while I slept. I needed the world to give me any explanation, even a strange one. I woke in the early morning with a sore throat and a raw feeling behind my eyes. The phone was exactly where I left it. I tapped play. The video began with soft static and my steady breathing in the background. At 3 minutes and 1 second after 3 in the morning, I watched myself sit upright in bed. I shifted into present tense without even realizing it, narrating the way you might when you see something you should not be capable of doing. I am awake in the video, but I remember nothing. My eyes are wide open. I lean toward the camera. My lips part slightly. Erase the fourth. Replace. The voice is mine, but empty, stripped of thought or intention. I grabbed my keys and fled the room. I left the laptop, the notes, the recorder. Everything felt contaminated. The sky was still dark when I pulled out of the parking lot, the road lined with trees that looked like hollowed silhouettes. At the first stoplight, I glanced up at the rearview mirror. My reflection looked back at me, but it was smiling. A slow, knowing smile that did not touch my real face at all. I shut my eyes and gunned the engine until the mirror shook loose and fell forward with a soft clatter against the dash. I left Beckley before sunrise. I drove until the radio turned to static and then to silence. For days I kept moving. I did not tell anyone where I was going. Months passed. I changed my name. I moved twice. I avoided cameras and mirrors. I kept no photographs of myself. I thought distance would quiet everything. And for a while, it did. One afternoon, while browsing a second-hand bookstore, I pulled an old magazine from a low shelf. It fell open to a page with a group photo from some long-forgotten community event. At the center of the image was a blurred face. The rest of the people were perfectly sharp. The blurred figure wore a thin silver necklace, the same design as the one I used to wear every day. I let the magazine close. My hand trembled slightly. In the window beside me, my reflection stared back, waiting for me to flinch. And for the first time, I wondered something that hollowed me from the ribs outward. If I was never in that town in 2004, then why do I remember being afraid of the photo before I ever saw it? That one hit a little different. If these stories mean something to you, leave a like, subscribe, or share this video with someone who'd stay up to hear it too. And if you've got a true horror story of your own, my email's in the description. Now, story 6. After the fall, they told me to take 6 months. The fracture was clean, but the impact had messed up the soft tissue, and I was getting dizzy in ways that had nothing to do with the painkillers. The city made it worse. The lights, the sirens, the way people moved fast even when they had nowhere to go. So I packed a few things and drove out to my grandmother's old house near Mill Hollow. It sat near the slope of the woods, where the tree line thinned into gravel and the fog came in low like breath. The roof needed work, and the pipes complained when I ran the tap, but it was quiet. Most mornings I made coffee slowly, the way she used to. I would walk the perimeter of the yard with a pair of crutches and a notebook in my pocket, just to feel like I was tracking something real. My routines helped at first. Morning walks, afternoon books, evenings on the porch. From the top of the slope, I could see the narrow street that curved along the edge of the forest. There was only one streetlight left on that section, a tall, rust-colored post that always stayed lit. It should have flickered at least. Everything around here flickered. The power cut out once a week, and the fog rolled in so thick it swallowed the porch railing. But that streetlight never blinked. It burned a perfect pale yellow, steady and sharp, even when the sky collapsed into mist. At first I thought nothing of it. Maybe it was wired differently. Maybe it was solar. But even on the darkest nights, the light cast no shadow. It illuminated the road, but nothing nearby. My porch stayed dim. The fence posts stayed gray. The light had no weight to it. I started writing it down in the margins of my notebook. 6:02 p.m. light on. 1:11 a.m. Still bright. 5:37 a.m. Not dimming. Then one night I woke up at 4. No reason. Just one of those soft starts where the world feels a little too still. I stood at the window and looked down the hill. The light was still on. But something was wrong. It was not just lit. It was bright. Too bright. My yard should have been in shadows, but the grass glowed faintly like it was being lit from underneath. I raised my phone to snap a picture, just to prove it to myself. But the screen stayed black. I tapped it, reopened the app, tried again, still black. The next morning, I called the electric company. I said there was a lamp post down near the woods that seemed to be malfunctioning. I gave them the location, described the model. There was a pause on the other end. Then the woman told me gently that there were no longer any registered posts at that stretch of road. Not since 2002. That night, I watched it again. I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my knees and a mug of cold tea. The light burned on. I stared for so long my eyes started watering. And that was when I saw someone standing beneath it. I blinked once, twice. Still there. They were standing still, half in profile, with their arms loose at their sides. I could not see the face, but the way the figure stood, the angle of the legs, the slight lean on one side, it looked like me. I told myself it was a trick of light, some neighbor kid messing around. But no one had lived past the bend in years. I waited another minute, then reached for the old binoculars my grandmother used for bird watching. They were dusty and a little scratched, but they worked. I adjusted the focus and lifted them to my eyes. The figure tilted its head upward. No eyes, just smooth, pale skin where the face should have been. And slowly, the head leaned to one side, far past the point that a neck should allow. Then the light above it flickered. Once, just once, and the figure was gone. I dropped the binoculars. My body reacted before I could think. I left the porch light on and hobbled down the slope, crutches thudding softly on the gravel. The air was dry. No sound. At the base of the hill, beneath the light, the ground was undisturbed. No footprints. No drag marks. Just the light. Steady again, humming quietly into the fog. I turned back toward the house, heart still hammering, trying to swallow down the shaking in my chest. When I got to the top of the hill, the front door was wide open. I knew I had locked it. I stood there for a long time, halfway between the threshold and the dark. The house behind me felt wrong, like a room you step into thinking it's yours, only to realize the furniture is just slightly off. But I walked back inside. I closed the door and turned every lock. The next morning, I installed a camera on the porch. It was one of those motion-activated models that ran on a battery and saved footage to a card. I angled it toward the slope and the streetlight beyond, just in case. That night, I stayed in the recliner next to the front door. I set an alarm for every hour, but kept nodding off between them. At 2:41 a.m., the motion alert chimed. Not loud, just a soft tone, like a digital breath. I opened the feed. For a few seconds, the screen was empty. Then something moved. From the left side of the frame, where the woods met the road, a shape stepped out. Human, I thought. Almost. It crossed slowly into the cone of light. And then it was gone. No turn. No backward step. Just missing. As if it had walked past the edge of the lens and vanished. I rewound the footage 3 times. I stared at the timestamp. There was no return. Nothing came back out of the woods. I wanted to believe it was a trick. A glitch. A fox. Some fog playing with the lens. But every cell in my body had stiffened like ice in a tray. I could not ignore it anymore. At 3 a.m., I woke without the alarm. The lights inside the house were flickering. My stomach dropped. I moved toward the porch door slowly, with one hand on the frame to keep myself steady. The world outside was darker than I had ever seen it. The streetlight was off. The first time since I arrived, it had gone completely dark. I stepped onto the porch. Nothing. No hum. No glow. The only sound was the slow creak of the boards beneath me. Then I saw it. Not the light, but something moving. A small glow. Low to the ground. Like a handheld lamp. A flashlight. It bobbed gently with each step, coming up the hill from the base of the road. The shape carrying it moved steadily, without sound. Feet not scraping gravel. Arms still. Every part of me screamed to go back inside. But I could not move. The beam tilted up as it got closer. It lit the trees. Then the porch railing. Then me. I saw my own face staring back. Thinner. Blank. Eyes sunken. Mouth slightly open. Not angry. Not afraid. Just watching. I stumbled backward and slammed the door, locking it with both hands. My legs nearly gave out as I slid down to the floor, back against the wood. I waited for something. A knock, a creak, even footsteps on the porch. Nothing. When I checked the camera the next day, there was no footage past midnight. No motion. No light. Nothing at all. 3 days later, I packed what I could carry and left. I told no one. I moved to a small apartment closer to the center of town, near a bus line and a grocery store. I chose a building with no direct street access. No woods. No slope. And no streetlights outside the windows. But every night, just after 2, a soft white glow appears behind the curtain. The exact height and position where the corner of the bedroom wall meets the window frame. It fades by dawn. I do not check anymore. I do not go to the porch. I do not look at my reflection after dark. And if I try to remember that last night at Mill Hollow, the locked door, the face in the light, there is one thought I cannot shake. I left the house. I locked the door behind me. But what if the thing that stayed inside believes it is me? My name is Melissa Clark. I was 27 at the time, working solo for a private geological survey firm out of Charleston. The kind of job that meant sleeping in tents, logging rock data, and walking ridgelines most folks would rather fly over. I preferred it that way. That October, I was assigned to a stretch called Twin Ridge, near the West Virginia border. It wasn't marked on any tourist map, and the locals didn't hike it. Too steep, too brittle. One slip and you'd meet God or gravity, whichever got to you first. I set up camp just below the west face. My routine was always the same. Stake the tent, chart the boundaries, run slope tests and core samples by daylight, review data by lantern, sleep light. Repeat. 3 days max on site, then out. Twin Ridge had a reputation. In 1998, someone died out there. A solo hiker, last seen taking photos by the cliffs. Body never recovered. Just a camera bag found hanging in a tree. People said the wind there could whisper. I didn't care about stories. I cared about angles, mineral layers, and stable ground, which is why I noticed the anomaly almost immediately. It was on day one, late afternoon. I was measuring a slant off the southern ledge when something caught the corner of my eye. A glint, too steady for sunlight. When I turned, I saw it. A silver pocket watch, dangling from a dry branch no thicker than a finger. It hung right at the edge, maybe 2 inches from open air. No chain, no tag. Just the hook balanced perfectly, like it had been placed with intent. I stepped closer and crouched low, careful not to shift my weight forward. My first thought was obvious. Someone lost it. I took a photo, marked the GPS point, glanced at the face. The hands were ticking. Not just that. It was keeping accurate time. I hadn't seen a wind-up run that smooth in years. I pocketed it without much thought. Planned to clean it up. Maybe ID the owner. Maybe not. One more odd thing found in the woods. But even then, I had this strange pause in my chest, like I had just picked up something that had been waiting to be noticed. Back at camp, I logged the location in my field book and started digging into the markings on the watch case. No initials, no serial number I could trace. Just faint scratches along the edge, like it had been gripped too tight too many times. I set it on my cot before bed, closed the flap, and went to sleep with the ridge silent outside. That night, I fell asleep early. The watch sat beside my cot, ticking faintly, a soft mechanical heartbeat in the dark. Around midnight, I stirred, thought I heard it closer. But when I opened my eyes, it was still where I left it. I went back to sleep. By morning, it was gone. I tore through the tent, emptied my pack, checked every pocket. Nothing. No trace of it. I walked outside thinking maybe it rolled. Maybe it fell through the flap. But there wasn't even a dent in the ground. That was when I noticed my notebook. I always kept it zipped inside my gear bag. Waterproof cover. Dated entries. But now, on a blank page near the middle, there was a line written in my handwriting. The watch runs, but time stands still. I stared at the words. I didn't remember writing them. The ink looked fresh, not smudged or warped. I checked the previous page. My last entry from the night before was about sediment density. Nothing else. I didn't sleepwalk. I didn't hallucinate, but the words were there. That evening, I lay awake long after sunset. I didn't close my eyes, not even when they started to burn. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it. The ticking, not faint, not background. It was right beside my ear. I shot up, heart hammering, reached for my bag. Nothing inside. But there, pressed into the soft dirt just outside the tent wall, was a circle, about the size of a pocket watch. Clean, shallow, like something had been resting there, just long enough to leave an impression. I turned on my headlamp and stepped outside. Across the ravine, on a high, narrow shelf I hadn't surveyed yet, something silver glinted in the moonlight. The same watch, sitting perfectly still on a rock that no one should have been able to reach. That was the first time I felt fear on the ridge, and I should have left then. I know that now. I grabbed the headlamp and the safety rope and headed toward the original cliff where I had found the watch. The air felt sharper than before, like the ridge had shifted its weight during the night. I clipped the harness to a pine root and eased myself up the slope. Every foothold felt slicker than it should have, as if the rock remembered the wrong weather. Halfway up, a gust nearly knocked me sideways. I braced hard and kept going. The ledge came into view and my breath caught, but not from the climb. The branch was still there. The watch was not. I scanned the ground, the trees, the sky. Nothing. No sign of metal or chain or anything that could have rolled away. My GPS beeped then, a soft mechanical chirp that usually meant low battery. When I checked it, the clock was off by 6 hours. The date and coordinates were correct. Only the time was wrong. I shut the device and forced myself back to camp. My hands shook when I unlatched the tent. The place felt too quiet, like the whole ridge was holding its breath. I sat down on my cot and tried to steady my breathing, but the silence pressed against my ears until it rang. To calm myself, I played back the audio notes from day one. My voice filled the tent flat, technical, the way I always sounded when logging data. At 1:20, a faint whisper bled into the recording. A woman's voice. My voice. Don't let her see the watch again. I snapped the recorder off. My hands were sweating. For a long moment, I just sat and stared at the tent walls as they pulsed with the wind. I told myself it was interference. Echo. Anything. But my throat tightened each time I replayed the words in my head. Sometime after 4 in the morning, I woke to a loud, sharp ticking. It hit like someone clicking metal beside my pillow. I sat up fast, heart thudding. The tent was empty. The sound was not. I pushed open the flap. The ridge was washed in pale blue pre-dawn light. And on the far ledge across from me, maybe 20 yards away, someone stood. My breath left my body. She was my height, my build. Same jacket, same hair tied back. Her head tilted at the same angle I tilted mine when listening to distant rockfall. She held the pocket watch in her right hand. I froze. The ticking grew louder. My watch on my wrist stopped. The second hand snapped into place at exactly 4 o'clock. I backed up 1 step. She did not move. Then, she turned her head toward me, slow and precise, like she was answering a question I had not asked. I ran. The ground behind me trembled with footsteps, perfectly matched to mine. Every stride I took, there was another just a fraction behind it, like an echo trying to become real. I did not look back. The ridge blurred and the trees slashed past in dark strokes. All I could hear was my own breath and the relentless ticking keeping pace. I did not stop until the ridge dropped away behind me and the world opened into the lower valley. I left Twin Ridge the next afternoon, filed a resignation letter that same night. I told the company I was done with field work for good. No reason. No details. For months afterward, I could not stand the sound of a clock. Even my phone alarm made my skin crawl. I taped over mirrors because once, just once, I thought I saw someone behind me in the reflection holding something small and silver. I threw out every watch I owned. But sometimes, in the quiet right before sleep, I still hear that steady tick, the same rhythm, the same weight, like time trying to correct itself, like something that knows exactly when I stopped being certain of who I was. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I truly mean that. If you enjoyed these stories, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. That way, you won't miss the next ones. And once again, thank you for walking this dark road with me tonight.